This weekend is Mother's Day weekend. This morning, I want to remember my late mother. My mother had 5 boys with my father. It was their second marriages to different spouses. In my mother's case, her first marriage produced 1 son. And after that son, for some strange reason, she suffered a series of miscarriages and death of her babies in their infancy. Her husband used that misfortune as a reason to divorce her. After the divorce, she relocated from the western region to Kumasi to get over the trauma of the misfortunes and of the divorce. She restarted her life in Kumasi, first working at the kitchen of Prempeh College at the bakery section. So it was a matter of great pride for my mother when years later, her son, Kweku Amfo, became a mathematics tutor at Prempeh College, the same school in which she had been working in the kitchen. It was while she was working at Prempeh that she met my father. And soon after they married, she quit her job at Prempeh and, on the advice of her auntie, took to selling smoked fish at the Central Market in Kumasi. Then Osajifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah built a new market in Kumasi, the Asafo Market, and also established an outlet for the State Fishing Corporation with its own co-store at Edum. The management of State Fishing Corporation approached a number of the women selling smoked fish at the Central Market and offered them space at Asafo Market if they would switch from smoked fish to fresh fish. My mother was one of the first women to see the potential of the new business opportunity. And that is how she gave up her stall at the Central Market for a place at Asafo Market. Then my father died, leaving her with 5 boys. I was the first, and I was only 14. Kwame Nkrumah had been overthrown a few years earlier, and the neglect and subsequent collapse of State Fishing Corporation had begun. And so the co-store in Kumasi had no stocks to supply the women who had become its outlet. But the women were clever. At the time of the collapse of State Fishing Corporation, a private fishing company, Bankwaze, stepped into the vacuum created by the collapse of the corporation. Bankwaze had no interest in opening a co-store in Kumasi. So the women from Kumasi took to traveling to Tema to buy fish from Bankwaze. And that is the thing that impresses me the most about my mother's generation of women. If one business opportunity closed, they were quick to jump to another. They were hardworking, resourceful, and willing to do anything so their children would not go hungry. And so from the late 60s to the 90s, after the collapse of State Fishing Corporation, my mother and her colleagues traveled to Tema twice a week. They would travel through the night, arrive at Tema at daybreak, go to Bankwaze, transact their business, which took the whole day, repackage their purchases, and dispatch them by trucks to Kumasi. And then they would themselves travel through the night by bus to Kumasi, arrive at dawn, freshen up, and then get to the market by 6 a.m. to receive the trucks with their purchases for sale. My mother's generation worked hard. Remember, that was a generation of women that society did not think needed formal education. And so it was rare to meet any woman of my mother's age who was educated to any level. Now, there are 2 things about my mother's life I want to focus on. One had to do with the way women in Ghana were socialized to believe that they could not function without men. When my father was alive, my mother toned down her strengths. And when he died, she convinced herself that she could not raise her 5 boys by herself. And so she dispatched Kweku to Sefiyoso, Bernard to Accra, and Anthony and Mina to various uncles and aunties to ease the burden of being a widow. Jude was just about a year old, And so she kept him to herself and retained me in Kumasi with her to help babysit Jude. My mother did not need to send any of her children away, but she simply accepted the lie that a woman could not do much without a man. Now, with my father out of the way, she began gradually to assert herself. She did not have to hide behind the shadow of her husband, and so she stood tall. She renovated our house at South Treso and added more rooms for renting. She was all about additional income streams. And then when she realized that she could raise her children by herself, she went back for Bernard and Anthony. Kweku was then in the training college. My mother doubted her own strength, and it took time for her to wake up to the truth that she could do more for herself and her children than society said she could. The second thing about my mother's life is that although she did not have any formal education, she proved to be deeper and more intelligent than most educated men, at least the men she dealt with. Let me just give you one example of what I mean. My mother had always been CPP. Much like today, your political party affiliation was imposed on you by your tribe. So, if you were Fanti in Kumasi in the 50s and 60s, you were supposed and presumed to be CPP, and there was nothing you could do about it. Just as today, if you are Ewe, you are expected to be NDC, and people will not believe that you are not. And if you are an Ashanti, you are supposed to be MPP, and you can forget about trying to convince anyone otherwise. So by virtue of being Fanti in Kumasi in the 50s, my mother was branded CPP, a fate she accepted after she had been violently attacked at Kejetia after being overheard speaking Fanti. She lost the twins she was carrying in her womb from that attack. So in the 1969 elections, she went all out for Bedemes now. At the Bantama constituency level, she was elected as the chairperson for the party, but she asked to be the vice chairman because she did not want her lack of formal education to affect the constituency. But the quality of her submissions were such that the members were more than happy to overlook the fact that she did not have any formal education. In the 80s, my mother came to spend some days with Florence and I in Accra. During the visit, I took her along to one of my preaching appointments. At one point during the service, out of habit, I crossed my legs. She leaned over to me and said softly, "Ebo, we are in the house of God. Put your foot down." Now, gorgeous, I was in my 40s then, but I have not crossed my legs again in church. Anytime I'm tempted to do so, I hear her voice. We are in the house of God. Put your foot down. Her maiden name was Beatrice Akins, but everyone called her Auntie Ama, and I was blessed to have her for my mother. In her honor, I wish all mothers a happy Mother's Day in advance. May your children and your grandchildren make you proud.